this next panel session now, which is scheduled for 11:30. We're just so efficient on this side, but we're on time. We have Ylann Schemm, Director of the Elsevier Foundation and External Partnerships. David Pollard, who just gave us his speech as well. Thank you for that. That was a great session, especially about Japan. And Kirsten Spahr van der Hoek, Innovation Lead at Accenture Digital. And what we'll be speaking about, and the good thing is with this panel session, we have basically an opportunity to ask the audience if they want any questions. So please feel free to ask any questions, and that way any stragglers as well can come in afterwards. It's about equality and diversity policy and direction, evaluating the present and planning for the future. If we want to start off with any questions, maybe we could start with Ylann. Maybe you could tell us a little bit about the Elsevier side. Oh, Dr. Okay. Please, then we'll come back to you.
I'm Janice View with George Mason University in the U.S. Mr. Pollard, I had a question. I just wanted clarification on that last quote that you put up, where you talked about the self-reported data from companies that perceive themselves to be more competitive. Was the self-reporting that they perceived themselves to be more competitive, or was there empirical evidence that they were more competitive, and the self-reporting had to do with the fact that they had LGBTI policies in place? That was confusing to me.
Actually, I was not allowed to put the source of that quote out there, but it came from McKinsey themselves. So they had done the study to, I assume that they had actually approached the organizations themselves to get the data. So self-reporting in that sense.
All right, shall I kick off?
Yes, please.
Okay.
You can tell us.
So my name is Ylann Schemm, and I'm the director of the Elsevier Foundation, but I also have a hat within Elsevier, which is very much external partnerships, which focus on the SDGs, also technology engagement, a great deal around women in tech. So I'm speaking from two hats, and I'd like to share a little bit of our journey within Elsevier around gender inclusive policies. And I would say that it really began in the foundation, which is a separate 501c3, a US charity. And it has about $1 million a year. And we focus on three main areas: diversity in science, research in developing countries, and global health, health and information. But over 10 years ago, 2006 to 2015, we had a program in place which really looked at creating a more level playing field for academia. And I must say, it was mostly, there were 50 grants, it was 2.5 million, and it was everything from mentoring, relocation, what do you call it, a dual career spouse relocation grants, childcare and professional visibility, which is a huge issue. And the idea was to really seed ideas so that institutions would later go on and embed funding and policies in their institutions. And through this, we became involved increasingly in the gender summits. Elizabeth Politzer, the director of Porsche, who's here at the STEM Equality Conference. She started a dialogue and action platform to really try and make changes in policy and to bring together all of the stakeholders. And initially, it was a place for the foundation, but more and more I started pulling in colleagues from Elsevier, and we started having these amazing eureka moments, these moments where we're like, my gosh, wow, we really need to do something as a publisher, as an information analytics company. We're sitting on, we can really influence how sex and gender is reported in the research by making changes in the peer review guidelines, working with industry bodies to do this beyond just our own journals. And what about editorial board diversity? You know, we need to really start putting in quotas and targets for our publishers so that, and right now that's what we have, that each publisher has to work on a 10% increase in editorial board diversity. How about the conferences we put on? More than 50 a year in scientific disciplines. We started looking at our conference speakers, 15% women speakers, these are invited speakers. Through engagement interventions, I think just in a couple years, 2 years, it's up to 24%. Still nowhere near where it needs to be, but really through consciousness raising, through benchmarking, you were talking about that. So a lot of these ideas came Another big one that came out was about sex disaggregated data. Elsevier has, with its Scopus database, has access to a huge amount of data about all the research that's indexed out there. And at 2 o'clock, my colleague Maria de Klein, the head of analytical services at Elsevier, will share some of that. But that idea came at a conference, the Gender Summit conference like this, that eureka moment of, wow, beyond the foundation, beyond just giving money and being a good partner and trying to stimulate advances for women scientists, there's so much that we can do in our core business. So why is that report important? It's because it puts data and evidence in the hands of policymakers, decision makers, so they can see how women's research output vis-a-vis their male counterparts. What do you see happening during what are traditionally often family building years? What happens afterwards? We often see they come back stronger than ever. I won't go into the details, but there are things like citations, collaborations. So it's a good piece of work to build on, and it's the start, I would say. So there was a lot of learning that started with the foundation, came to the company. It hasn't always been that easy, but I think more and more we've tried to benchmark. Elsevier is an EDGE signatory, so that's economic dividends, economic dividends for gender equality, which is a wonderful program, and it's a good start. It looks at how policy enabling is your organization in terms of gender. What is the pay gap? We did this in 8 key locations, and I think if we were to do it again, and I hope very much so, for the second time we've been certified at the assess level, which is the first level. It's the good citizen level, I would say. It's so important to be transparent and to bring your employees along on the journey. So one of the things I was asked to do within Elsevier was to lead a diversity sprint. And I'm sure this is jargon. I had never heard it before, but you get a group of talented, engaged colleagues together, and you do something really, really, really fast. and then I think it's supposed to end after 30 days, but we're now into about the 3rd month. And we were looking at things like, how do you establish a global diversity audit? And we haven't cracked that nut, and so I would love to talk to those who have ideas about this, because exactly that voluntary reporting piece of it, and how do you define, for instance, ethnicity across geographies? I mean, this is all sorted in the US, but what about, Europe and legal constraints? And so we're very much, right now we have EDGE, we have a few other things, but I'd love to hear about other organizations. Things like family leave. Many organizations have this very well organized. We wanted to really implement something robust, starting in the US, and making sure that it was gender neutral, and making sure that not just pregnancy, not just maternity leave, but very much about elder care, partner care. And I know that so many companies are far ahead, but this was an important start for us, and through this sprint we were able to get that commitment implementation in the US, and now we're on to the other geographies. And maybe just the last one, the employee resource groups. So I'd like to speak about a colleague of mine, Michiel Koolman, who's the SVP, Senior Vice President at Elsevier, publisher relations, a wonderful ambassador and very knowledgeable colleague. A few years ago, he went to our HR and he said, I want us to join Workplace Pride. And initially the reaction was somewhat dismissive, and he was just such a positive and strong networker, and the administration basically came forward and said, we will do this. But it wasn't without a fight. It was kind of like, really, is that necessary? And he's gone on in a couple of years, this was 2013, I believe, to establish 10 of these networks across Elsevier. And what's been so wonderful is that they're really, really inclusive. Everybody goes to these events. Everyone knows that the Workplace Pride events will be fun, they'll be interesting, there'll be debates on PrEP and gay bingo and lots of just wonderful. And I think that's a real achievement, and it has to do also with having a very strong head. Someone like Michiel who's authentic, who's very senior, who I think he was named one of the Financial Times LGBTQ...
Top 100.
Top 100. And all of a sudden what you see is the whole culture of the organization starts to change. I'm like, wow, we're really proud. This is fantastic, Michiel. Thank you. and I guess where we are, and I'll stop after this, is trying to get really a much more robust structure for the employee resource groups, so that not every resource group has someone as wonderful and senior as Michiel at the head. So how do you explain how you get senior sponsorship, how you apply for budget, how you get things done, how do you get a wide variety of people coming to your events? So we have lots of work. The Dutch say werk aan de winkel, lots and lots of work to do. But it's been an exciting journey so far, and I'm excited to share it, and I'm excited to learn from all of you as well.
Oh, thank you for that. I just pick up on one thing you mentioned about being able to implement quotas. Because I know a lot of the time, that's one of the things that you get the most kind of, not blowback, but resistance from. Why do we need quotas? What can we do with those? And can you apply quotas to anything other than women in a visible way? In gender, I mean. Were you able to, was it just for gender? Because you mentioned for the 15%.
What we were talking about were our core processes, and really, starting with, for every single discipline, as we know, it's completely different, right? So physics is a very different story from life sciences. So we've developed a tool, which is part of the gender report I mentioned, where you can analyze what's happening in a discipline and what makes sense given that discipline in terms of editorial board balance. But what we do know is that across the board, we need a much better balance. And so publishers have this 10% increase target.
Well, these targets, yes. Maybe Kirsten will let us know more about it's because it's the process.
Sorry, I don't hear you really well, sorry.
Oh, maybe has my microphone gone off
it's
again?
also
No.
with my ear, probably.
No, I was just mentioning that one of the ways is quotas, for example, which I've had a lot of resistance about over the years, kind of in getting underrepresented people in. What are some other ways? Maybe you could tell us more about your strategies.
Yes, well, it's still morning, right? Good morning, all, and thank you all for being here, and thank you for the invitation.
Yes,
actually, recently I joined Accenture in the Netherlands as the innovation lead, and I have a bit of a mixed background. So I worked for McKinsey before as well. I've done a lot of complex transformations, and I think the diversity and inclusion journey is almost like a systemic transformation we're in, right? So I really like some of the key learnings that we've got from that broader area. On the other hand, also I've got like a bit of a data background, so I like sometimes that it's really good to have both the hard and the soft side. Recently, I joined Accenture, and Accenture, I think 2 weeks ago, became #1 diversity and inclusion company. I think it was a Thomas Reuter Award or something. And I was quite glad actually to hear that. And it's across different dimensions of diversity, because I found it important to mention that, right? If you're a sensitive person, or if it's all kinds of diversity, I think that we, in the end, want to build not just gender or LGBT. I mean, it's way beyond that. Reflecting on the key practices that Accenture is trying to apply in this learning journey, because I definitely think it's fair to say that it is a learning journey for all organizations. No one has the right answer yet, and together we're trying to build and learn. I think there are 3 pillars, basically in the approach of Accenture, and it's really research-based. So it first starts with the belief of our most senior leaders and our CEO that diverse groups lead to innovation and that it leads to business results. And I think having this bold leadership and really the belief with the heart and the mind that it is also a business rationale next to the human rationale is really important and really helpful actually for us. And we see this bold leadership also in talent discussions. So for instance, we've got a new country managing director in the Netherlands, and the previous one was female, and she's again female. So I think through Accenture globally, we're trying to make bold decisions, also in putting people in places that have a diverse profile. And that bold leadership and that is really a strategic priority is, I think, a #1 must have. Then I think the belief of Accenture is really that we take comprehensive action. And what I really like, I like to say that Accenture has a bit of an action bias, but sometimes it's positive because we try to test and learn and measure and see the effects. And I think some of the new things are also that we're getting more and more nuance. For instance, if you look at the family leaves or the maternity leaves and the paternity leaves, that it should be inclusive to all. So we try to get to the next set of practices. Also, for instance, for some of the networks, to have them really open for all. But personally, I also experience really the value of having some groups where it's smaller group discussions about sensitive topics that are safe spaces as well. So I think that's the second group of actions. And then thirdly, we've got a lot of research about the importance of having an empowering environment on the cultural and the really soft elements. And what I really liked was our every year we do a massive equality research, and this year basically we looked at all the different practices that make a culture inclusive or feel inclusive to everyone. And basically the top 3 factors out of a list of, I think it's 40, were that people feel they're giving trust. So the trust to decide to work at home or in the office, the trust to decide, do you want 8 vacation days now, or do you want them spread out over in a different way, rather than having a control approach for those things. And then secondly, what I also really like, so second on the list is the freedom to be yourself and to be creative and innovative. And also the creativity and innovation linked to diversity, I found really striking there. So that's a very important factor for a lot of people to feel that it's an inclusive environment. And there were some obvious ones, like the third one was training. But it kind of shows, I think, a little bit our approach. We set some bold targets. So our senior leaders did set some targets for gender equality at first. So the 50-50 split in 2020, and then also obviously for different levels in the hierarchy. And we also believe that, for instance, for pay gaps, it is helpful to create a lot of transparency and to push transparency and the factual discussion there a lot. So I think it kind of maps out that on the one hand we're trying to do a lot, while also learning a lot still. I'm not sure if it gives a good answer to your question, but yeah.
Well, part of this session is to see what people have done in the past, evaluate it right now, and then plan. So I'm guessing a lot of people here are saying, well, what do we do to plan for the future? How do we get people to accept that we have targets? How do we get people to accept that we need quotas? You know, and part of that, which I think all 3 of you kind of mentioned, and from the previous speech, is securing resource. You know, getting some buy-in into what you're doing. I don't know if anyone has any experience about that, about quotas or targets, because I know quotas especially is resistance, but how do you secure a resource to... Go ahead, Ylann.
I'd like to just mention something that was quite recent. In April, the UK Gender Pay Gap report came out, and all listed companies, I believe, were required to report on this. So it was actually a critical moment. And not just in the UK, where Elsevier has offices and colleagues, but for the entire organization, because what you see suddenly on those charts is exactly where you are in relation to the companies that you measure yourself against, the industries, we saw large discrepancies at Elsevier, and it was a wake-up call, and there was a lot of discussion and anger, and not just women in the UK, but in the US and other locations who said, if this is happening there, what's happening here? And the reason I mention this, it feels like dirty laundry, but it's not. It's about dialogue, and it's about the power of metrics. And since that moment, there's been such a strong commitment in the leadership to get this right. And so, I think everyone recognizes the power of data now, of the benchmarking. And even though it's not so easy, like I was talking about the need for a global diversity audit, we will get there. We'll find a way. But I just wanted to share that because it was important.
Yeah, maybe to build on it. Or do you want, David?
No, go ahead.
I really also recognize that as a problem solver, because I think innovation is all about solving problems and finding creative solutions. I kind of observed that in the diversity and inclusion problem we're trying to solve and to change the situation, often there is less reflective dialogue Quite often, obviously there are different groups involved, right? We've got the people who stand up for the topic, and probably everyone here is one of those, right? Also biased, basically, in our beliefs about how important it is. And I think there are also a lot of large groups, and I see it in many situations, that rather than really reflecting on it and listening and learning, the problem solving stops. And therefore, I believe that we can advance this transformation even faster by applying new problem-solving techniques, and also by using technology to a larger extent as a tool for change. So, for instance, we're now developing at Accenture a fairness tool, basically because many algorithms have biases in it, so to really get into the technological products and to ensure that the new products that we're developing are de-biased. That's one example of using technology as a force for good in this discussion. And I personally believe that we can advance this transformation much more if we use more new, and I call it problem-solving techniques, but that's a little bit of a business language probably, but different approaches to ensure that the dialogue and the insights are done with the right mindset and learning mindset, I think.
I just have to comment here on this last thing. I have so many things I'd like to say, but we actually at our last conference did a workshop on how artificial intelligence is actually influenced against LGBT inclusion. Algorithms are actually designed for non-LGBT people. And so it comes into the discussion indeed on how you can indeed, remain at the beginning or at the forefront of changes. But what I wanted to really go back to was your question about resources, which I think this is really applicable probably to everybody. When it comes to LGBT inclusion, we of course recognize that we're a very small percentage of workforces. And I'm sure that's probably the same in academia as it is in society. So we, from the very beginning, have taken the standpoint of how can we really present a business case to the people that we want to influence. As much as it sounds like a cliche, the business case is incredibly important because it is about measurement. It's about demonstrating to those people that you want to influence what you want to change. So what we did when I was still working at ING, the bank, we actually presented an entire story about why we needed to have an employee network, why we needed funding, and we put it in the form of a credit proposal because this is what the management understood. Yeah. And in that credit proposal, we talked about the competitive side of what our other bank competitors were doing, the mitigating factors, and this is what you do in a credit proposal, to talk about what's the downside for doing this, and then talk about what the upside is. And I think this mindset of really putting yourself in the shoes of the people you want to influence is really, you can use this anywhere, any organization, any type of environment where you want to influence people. Tell them the upside, tell them the downside, tell them how you want to plan it, and tell them how much you want to do, or to have to plan it, or to do it. So.
Yeah, I totally recognize it because I worked for a bank as well, and I applied the same strategies. It is so important. Yeah, you're right.
It works. It works.
Yeah, I wouldn't mind hearing more about how AI is anti-LGBT, because yesterday we had some great examples of how artificial intelligence was killing women to an extent, the lack of women in the resources. So one of the examples, I don't know if anyone was here yesterday, was airbags. Because women weren't used to test the effect of airbags, they ended up killing women at the start because women are shorter, on average, and they drive closer to the wheel. I'm repeating these things. If anyone has a source, feel free to send it to me. So I think that's an important point about how AI...
Yeah.
Did you want to comment further? Maybe
Go ahead, because I have to think about what I'm going to say.
Okay, you think... But it's a valid point.
Do you want to go for it? Yeah, I fully agree. We call it responsible AI. It's actually a growing practice because we believe and also feel that we are responsible if we create the products of the future, also to create inclusive products of the future. I think it's across all minority groups, right? It's LGBT, but also race, gender, all kinds of dimensions. And it's also, I see it in all innovation practices, like if it's whether it's healthcare, it doesn't matter which which area or industry, and it's not just technology related, that's also important. So basically, while I was working in New York for the Center for Talent Innovation, which is a diversity inclusion advisory firm, we really helped a lot of organizations also to create their innovation process in a more inclusive way, to ensure that the products of tomorrow are made by a representation of who we are as society. So it's on the one hand really in the technicalities, so basically getting into the databases, and it's very nuanced. So for instance, we see that certain minority groups live in certain postal areas, like certain areas. So if you take out some of the biases, you need to be aware of the relationships with other factors. So it's really like econometrically and data analytics driven solutions. But it's also, I think, human-based solutions that are necessary. So for instance, what we try to do is also include the minorities in the test groups in an equal way. So we know that if we test certain medicine with a group of male persons, that it doesn't work the same for female. So I think it's both in the human elements of developing new services and products, and in the technical development. And it's early stage, right? We're all exploring how to do this in the right way.
This is also about disclosure, and that Elsevier is on the research end of it. So, and I think that the catchword I've heard for this is gendered innovations. It's a term that Dr. Londa Scheibinger captured. I think she received a European Commission grant some years ago to develop case studies, both with US academics and European ones, to demonstrate this. The airbags is one of the most famous ones, but also how heart disease presents differently in men than women. And so historically it's been greatly underdiagnosed in women. It's much more kind of diverse symptoms, flu-like symptoms, than the angina pain you always think of. So this kind of critical research. And what we did at Elsevier, when we had that eureka moment I mentioned, we started working with, for us, very important industry bodies. So the international, the ICMJE, the International Council of Medical Journal Editors, to have key guidelines adopted for the research. And these were then adopted. Once the industry body takes this on, then it's not just Elsevier health journals, it's all journals in that sector adopt it. So where we are now is that this has been made manifest. When you are doing your research, you have to talk about the sex of the stem cells, the mice that were used, the test subjects, the on and on and on. There has to be full disclosure. But I think the conundrum is not just the reporting, it's actually how do you make sure it happens? So really training the editors, the reviewers to watch out for this and to embed it in the whole culture. But yeah, gendered innovations, I would definitely recommend those of you who aren't familiar with the work to go Google it and take a look.
And how long did it take? I mean, when you're publishing something like a medical journal, you've got people's lives in your hands to a greater extent than you would if you're just reading the journal or if you're, kind of associated. How long did it take to implement these? Or is it still?
Well, it took probably a year.
Oh, okay.
I mean, and everything is consensus, right? And examination and protocols and.
Well, in the context of these discussions, I was anticipating a decade. But yeah, when you've got life-saving.
Well, I think.
I don't mean that you've reached an endpoint.
We presented the white paper, and then Londa had her work published in the Lancet, and then I think the socialization was going on for years before this. Yeah. It's just that moment catalyzed it, and so that's what I am certainly aware of. I'm not an expert here, but I can put you in touch with lots of experts who are working on this directly.
Thank you. Any questions? We've got about 3-4 minutes left. David, do you want to comment on anything?
Well, I just was going to say that I see some reoccurring themes here about, first of all, finding out what our own organizations are all about. What you had said before about Elsevier looking into through various benchmarks, et cetera. This is what we've seen with organizations that are taking part in the global benchmark as well. The mere fact that they go through an introspection to see what their policies and practices actually are almost always leads them to change something or have that eureka moment when they say, well, this is so easy, why didn't we do it before? And I think that's probably something that, you know, almost everybody here could do in your own organizations, is to take a very good hard look at what's actually being done and say, this is, you know, this is an easy thing. Why don't we go ahead and do it and implement it and not make too much of a drama about it, but simply do it, you know.
Sorry, did I end up with yours? I kind of, I really like the fact also to make it a positive and a fun thing. So as an INSEAD Business School alumna, I started, for instance, the Women's Association in the Netherlands, and we really wanted it to be open also to men. And rather than discussing well, some of the complexities and difficulties some of the women in our group are facing, we talk about innovation and technology, and then we have drinks, and it's a lot of fun. And I think in the learning, I think two things. It can go much faster if we have this rapid prototyping mentality. And on the other hand, if we make it factual and because I mean it's serious business, but also enjoyable to everyone. And maybe a last example that we find really important at Accenture is also to create a future workforce that is equipped with the right skills and an inclusive workforce. So for instance, we developed and we call it the Job Explorer Toolkit, and it's basically for children to make themselves aware of the future digital skills and of coding in a really fun way. So they get like this VR glasses, and they go to an island, and it explores them what they want to do in the field of innovation and technology, but it's also fun to them. And by making it inclusive to all kinds of children, and not just about topics that are often in technology a little bit biased towards men, right? So you can talk about cars and manufacturing, but if it's about a journey and traveling, it's a topic that is for both girls and boys of interest. So when you combine the fun element with the learning, and also beyond the organizational level, but on a society level, so to make the future generation prepared actually for an inclusive work environment, I think we can really change the game.
Can I mention one last
Okay,
thing?
but we are finishing up now.
Okay.
Maybe we could take it outside. We've got a
Sure, no
workshop
problem.
coming up at 12. But thank you very much. I'm sorry we have to cut it off. It is interesting. It's lots of fun. I'd like to thank our panelists. Thank you very much.